بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we finished the book of fasting, and now inshallah we're going to talk about the i'tikaf or the devotional retreat. Why do you think Ibn Qudama is speaking about or talking about i'tikaf now?
Because it's emphasized sunnah to do during Ramadan.
During Ramadan. It doesn't mean that it's not permissible outside of Ramadan. It's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reason that he put it here is because, like you said, it's usually associated with fasting. It's usually associated with the month of Ramadan. And why is that?
Specific hadith?
Because there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, when did he make i'tikaf? He made it in Ramadan. About it as well. He says, وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. It is a communal obligation. What does that mean? No.
If somebody, I guess, one person within, I guess, the locality.
Right. So one masjid in the locality, ideally, they need to make sure that this sunnah is actually being performed. And this is a Hanafi opinion, right? That it is a communal obligation. Meaning that if one masjid in the locality doesn't perform it, and then what? Right, then the entire community is actually held accountable for that. What are some other things that we know that are related to communal obligations? Burials, right? Those are the communal obligation. The janazah itself, right? Performing the funeral prayer. All of these are considered communal obligations, meaning that there are some people that have to do it. Otherwise, the entire community is held accountable. The only situation where it is not considered sunnah, where it is not considered recommended, is unless it is vowed. What does that mean? What is a vow? Or what is a nadhr? You guys know?
If Miguel, for example, makes it, if Miguel makes it today, I'm gonna.
Unique ruling in that sense, in that it's something that is actually disliked, but if an individual performs it, he is obligated to fulfill it. And we'll talk about what happens if I make a particular ruling, because there are certain rulings that happen during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what is the minimum amount of i'tikaf that I can do? Like, what's the minimum stay that I have to, what is the minimum amount of time I need to spend in the masjid for it to count as an i'tikaf? An hour? All right, in the madhāhib it is actually an hour. What do you guys think? What would you guys consider like, okay, yeah, that's an itikaf.
Maybe a time that you intentionally specify that you'll be in the masjid.
All right, so if I intend like, all right, 5 minutes, bam,
Yeah.
itikaf.
No, I.
Yeah. So there are different understandings from this. So basically, it can be an hour, and this is a Hanafi and the Ḥanbali opinion, that it can be an hour. An hour, what does an hour mean? It doesn't necessarily mean 60 minutes, but it means a portion of time, right? It means a long portion of time that I spend in the masjid, and this can be considered itikaf. The Shafis say even a moment. So even if we're talking about like 5 minutes to spend in the masjid, and my intention was itikaf, that is my itikaf. The Malikis, they say it has to be a day. And how do they determine a day? They determine from Fajr to sundown. Why is that? Why the daylight? There is a difference of opinion on women, and it's based off the hadith that we had spoken about before, right? Where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, remove the tents. So the Hanafis, what was their understanding when the Prophet ﷺ said to remove the tents?
Actually, I guess the general ruling. Just mislead women.
Ahsant, right? That's exactly what it is. That, okay, well, women actually aren't allowed to perform i'tikaf, and this is why the Prophet ﷺ had their tents removed. In the other madhāhib, what is their counter argument? Why did they say that the tents were removed?
It was a specific case, and he felt that the intention might have been created, and this is why, since he had multiple wives, those tents occupied space. And
sure. So he was feeling that their intention wasn't sincere. They were actually doing it for what purpose? For competition, right? It was competing for his attention, for his grace. You know, that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be, you know, he would take pride in the wife that was spending time in making itikaf. So that's why he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he took not because why, and how do we know that? Because he didn't just take their tents. What did he do? He took his own tent too. You know what I mean? So that's a good counter argument. Like, okay, if that was the case, why did he remove his tent? But you know, what was the purpose behind that? So the Hanafis, they say that, okay, well, i'tikaf is something when we have general rulings in Islam. When we have rulings in Islam where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually addresses the believers, those rulings apply to? They apply to everyone, right? They apply to men and women. So if women aren't allowed to do i'tikaf in the masjid, they have to be able to do it somewhere. So what solution did they come up with? Right, in the closet. So no. So where is itikaf done? Itikaf is done in the space or the place where the woman designates as her prayer place. Meaning that this is the place where they usually pray. And most of us in our homes, you know, even in the bedroom, right, there's a space that we usually have designated for prayer. Like this is the space where we generally pray. And if you have that space, whatever that space would be, what would you do? You would try to spend as much time in that space as possible. When is it okay to leave? So, all right. So obviously, if there's a need, right? If I have to go to the bathroom, because even in the masjid, someone might be like, oh, well, okay, you go to the bathroom here in the masjid. Like, is the bathroom actually masjid?
no.
Right, it's not. What is it? It's a bathroom, right? It's not actually masjid. You actually have to leave the prayer area to go and utilize the bathroom, right? Or go to utilize the shower. During the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how close were the bathrooms to the masjid? Right, they were far. They were actually in the outskirts of the city. You had to go like where you couldn't see the person. Like, if you looked, if you try to see the person from the masjid, it would be like outside of eye shot. Like, he would actually be a good distance away. And why is that?
For the privacy as well as
Privacy,
security.
right? Privacy.
Or where people's not walking around.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like privacy to protect people from the smell, right? To protect people from like feces in general, right? You don't want it to be in the pathways. You don't want it to be, I mean, you don't want it mixing up. So this is why it was, they were put so far away. And so what about if I was hungry? If I was living during the time of the Prophet ﷺ and I was hungry, what would I do? Right, I have to leave, right? And we have cases where the Prophet ﷺ actually would escort, his wives would come to talk to him. And what would he do? Right, he would escort them home, right? He would actually take them home. And this is where we have the famous story where there were two companions who were walking toward him. They saw him with Safiya and he was taking, and all of a sudden he saw them walking faster. So what did he do? He was like, hey. He was like, hey, come back here. He's like, why are you guys walking so fast? They're like, nah, nothing. So it's like, why are you walking so quickly? They're like, no reason, Ya Rasulullah. We would never think ill of you. And he was like, Innaha Safiya. He was like, she's my wife, Safiya, or this is my wife, Safiya. And there, again, for clarification, to remove any doubts, to remove any shubha. So going out for need, there's nothing wrong with that. It is something that's completely reasonable. Even in the haram, when you make itikaf in the Kaaba, it's not like they have restaurants inside the masjid, right? You actually have to go out to eat. So going out to eat or going out to that. So tayyib, there are other conditions that other madhāhib talk about. What if the masjid I am making itikaf in doesn't have Jummah? What do I do? Pray dhuhr? Make my own Jummah. It's like you actually have to go to Masjid al-Jami'. So even during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, they actually had a number of spaces called, like their musallas. Basically, people would go and they would pray there. And then for Jummah, what would happen? They would go to Masjid Nabawi, right? At that point, they would actually go to Masjid Nabawi, and that's where they would go and make Jummah. So this shows us the permissibility of having separate musallas, but when it comes time for Jummah, it's important for everybody to go to a Masjid al-Jami'. This is why it's called al-Jami', because it brings everybody together. So the Masjid al-Jami', this gives us a few understandings of the dynamics of the Prophet the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and how Jummah and the role that it served to bring, like that was the time where the community actually comes together, right? And where they actually, maybe that's the only time during the week where everybody actually saw each other. Otherwise, they were praying in their own musallas in their own localities. So the Ḥanbalis, they say that it has to be actually where, I mean, they say it's better to perform it itikaf where? Where there's Jummah, a Masjid al-Jami'. And why? So that you don't have to leave. But is it, in the madhab, is it permissible to make it in a masjid that doesn't have it? Yes, it is. So what would a Ḥanbali say to do if I'm making itikaf in a masjid that doesn't have Jummah? I'm sorry? No, go ahead. Just go to the masjid. Go to the masjid that has Jummah and come back. But can I go for a stroll? Right? So I'm coming back from Jummah and I was like, yeah, let me just stop by the market. You know what I mean? And walk through. Can I do that in the madhab? No, I can't. It has to be the shortest path, right? It has to be the shortest path going, and it has to be the shortest path coming back. Is it permissible for me to engage people on the way?
There's one exception, Sheikh said, someone is ill or sick and you ask about his or her feelings, but you still don't stop, you don't change your route. Yeah.
So the thing is, you can't change your route. Like, you're more than welcome to engage with people, but you cannot go out of your way. There's one exception that the Malikis mentioned where you can actually go out of your way. Not for the janazah. For your parents, right? For your parents. You can actually go out of the way to visit your parents, to stop, give them salam. Again, the idea is to keep the distance and keep the time as short as possible. Why? Because you are in a state of devotional retreat, right? This entire time, what is the purpose of i'tikaf? What is it? To worship, right? But what is unique about i'tikaf versus other types of worship? So there's nothing unique about it. It's just,
Seclusion,
right, the seclusion, right? The seclusion is something that's really important. What is important about seclusion, or what do we learn about it, or what can we benefit from it? Like, it's something that's part of the religion, right? This seclusion. So for when I'm in i'tikaf,
Thoughts, contemplation.
good, right? It's a time to contemplate. It's a time to ponder. It's a time to renew my personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what are some of the personal types of worship that we know that would be best to utilize during those times? Right, adhkar, dua. What else? Right, praying, right? All of the different sunan and nawafil. Reciting the Quran itself. Pondering over the Quran, sitting down, pondering over the verses, right? There's so much that can be done to develop that personal relationship. And I think, and just having conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that's really important. Yes.
I'm wondering if a modern couple would allow watching Islamic lectures.
So the thing is, anything that you're doing again, it's a personal thing. So if I'm using that time to seek knowledge, right? It's a type of seeking knowledge. So seeking knowledge, I don't see an issue with that. I don't see a problem with that. But when it comes to work, we'll talk about that. So what about vows? So if I vow, for example, I promise, Ya Allah, if you bless me with a new job, I'm going to make i'tikaf in Al-Quds. So at that point, what do I do? What do I have to do now? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gets me a new job. I gotta book a flight. But then I'm like, oh man, going to Palestine right now is really difficult. But Umrah flights are really cheap. Can I do it at Masjid Nabawi instead?
Yes.
I can. Or what about the Kaaba? Can I make it at Masjid al-Haram?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically in the madhāhib, what happens is that the masajid are in this order. If I make a vow for this, I can upgrade. It's easy to upgrade. But if I vow to make it here, I cannot downgrade. I cannot downgrade. I can go up, but I can't go down. What is the fourth category that we could put here? Oops. Any masjid. If I vow to make i'tikaf in a masjid, right? Or even a specific masjid, then I can move that up to Quds, I can move that up to Masjid Nabawi, I can move that up to Masjid al-Haram. So what do you do in i'tikaf? We talked about this. The idea is, again, developing that personal relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, focusing on those personal acts of worship. These are things that are very important. So there is a difference of opinion amongst the madhāhib. Can I work while I'm in i'tikaf? So if I'm, for example, I'm a programmer and I just need internet access. I set up my hotspot, off to work.
I'd say you have to, because some people have to work, so I'd say like.
I think everyone has to work, right? Unless you're living with your parents. So let's say I have to work. I couldn't get the days off, right? I couldn't get the days off. So I go in. What do we say about this person's i'tikaf?
I think that would be permissible on some level because of the niyah performing this.
So this would actually, yeah.
As much as you can out of it.
Okay, so this is a little bit different, right? This is a little bit different what you're talking about. You're talking about maximizing with the time that he has versus is the i'tikaf valid? You guys understand the difference?
Yes, I think it was totally that.
Okay, if the Ḥanbalis would say no, absolutely not. Your i'tikaf is not valid. You cannot work, right? It is not a time to earn, because earning is not what? It's not a person. It can be, right, depending on the intention, but it is not a personal type of worship, right? It's not a personal type of worship. So they would say no, absolutely not. This would not be valid. What would you get the reward for? You get the reward for staying in the masjid, right? Spending time, trying to use the breaks to maximize it. But would you get the reward for the i'tikaf? Not while you're working. So once your workday ends, that time would count toward the i'tikaf, but the working time wouldn't. For the Shafi'is, they're a little bit more lenient, but even they would say an entire workday doesn't count. They would say you can do some work, right? If you have some work to do, if you have some things to take care of. And what is that based off of? This is based on the Prophet ﷺ allowing people, and he himself actually stepping out, right, for needs. And working is it's a type of need, right? It's a type of need. So having those small movements or those small amount of work, it would be acceptable to them. But in general, you cannot just start working. So like we said, he should not leave except for those exceptions he makes during the vow. So I can make a vow where I'm making i'tikaf, and I can make exceptions to that rule. Meaning that I'm going to make i'tikaf and I work. But does that apply for the i'tikaf outside of outside of vows? No, it doesn't. I can't make exceptional vows because a vow is a certain specific promise that I'm making. Versus a general i'tikaf, this is not a specific promise that I'm making. This is something that is a general, and there's a type of worship that's involved that the Prophet ﷺ has actually delineated. So he must not touch a woman with lust. What is the ayah? أَوْ لَمَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ. Forgot the verse. So, yeah, let me وَلَا تُبَاشِرُوهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. And do not touch them while you are making i'tikaf. So the type of lust here, the type of touch here is a lustful touch. Why? So a regular touch is okay. How do we know that?
It specifies lust.
No, it just says لا تباشرهن وأنتم عاكفون في المساجد. Don't touch them while you are making i'tikaf.
Of course, lust is going to lead to.
Sure. Right. Al-lams or al-mubashara, these are used in a very general way throughout the Quran and the Sunnah, right? But in general, when we see them being used, they're usually associated with a lustful touching. And what do we have? We have context. We have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was actually getting his hair braided by Aisha radiallahu anha. So obviously to braid his hair, she'd have to touch his head. So that is something that he sallallahu alayhi wasallam actually allowed. So because he allowed it, yes.
Kissing the cheek.
So kissing is a little bit more, it depends. It can be,
Romantic,
right? Yeah, so it can be, or it could be out of, not what's the word I'm looking for? Like hunun, yani, ya akhi, what do you, like, it's out of kindness, like, or out of, when there are different ways people greet, and there are ways, like kissing your mother's head, like, for example, or like even kissing your wife, like kissing her on the cheek when you're parting, right? Kissing
your sheikh's hand.
Like, Allahu Akbar. But that's usually lustful though. So there are different types of kisses. There's no doubt about that. So I would like the one that's lustful. That would be problematic. What actually breaks the i'tikaf? Like, what action can be done that would break it? Based on the ayah, the only thing I could think of is actual intercourse, right? Why is that even a thing? Like, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say don't touch women while you're making i'tikaf? How would that even happen?
Such a high threshold to give and to cross.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, why would it even get there?
Would it be?
You know what I mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about people making i'tikaf. He's like, but don't touch your wives. That's not that. Huh?
His house was like attached, yeah?
His house was attached, but not to say that there are other houses that weren't nearby. And not all of the spaces where his wives stayed were all attached to the house, right? So some of them were, some of them weren't. So I'm just saying, like, it's very, there has to be more to that, right? It can't be that, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them don't touch your wives while you're making i'tikaf. At what point would you actually Like, you know what I mean? Like, why would that even happen?
But you would have to leave the masjid.
Okay.
Also, it would be a thing that would give you indication that you should stay at the masjid.
Okay.
You're not going to be having, touch your wife in the masjid.
Okay. Well, not just that. Let's think about the context. Let's think about the context. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, I remember, I think it was Chris Rock. He, in one of his comedy skits, he was like, marriages lasted longer during his parents' time. He's like, because they couldn't talk to each other. He's like, you know, the father would only know that somebody got hurt or went to the hospital after he came home from work, because there's no way for them to communicate. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, if the wife needed something for the home, or if she wanted to tell her husband something, what would she do? She'd have to, or like if he's making itikaf, what would she do? She needs to tell him something. She would go to the masjid, right? And after she go to the masjid, a husband being a husband, what does he do? Right, he goes and escorts her home. Right, he escorts his wife home. And this is not, and the reason I'm sharing this is because this is not something that was uncommon. Right, this was part of chivalry at that time. Unfortunately, some of the chivalry is dead and women killed it. So, so this was something that was very common. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about وَلَا تُبَاشِرُهُنَّ وَأَنْتُمْ عَاكِفُونَ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Because when you go to escort your wife home, what there's a chance of what happening? You already know, right? So this is a real problem that could occur. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically reminding them, hey, listen, go take her and what? And immediately get back to your itikaf. Like, they didn't have WhatsApp, and they didn't have text messaging. They didn't have phones. They didn't have all these ways. And there were needs, right? There were needs in the home. There were needs that things had to get done. And it's very important that those needs be fulfilled. And the way to do that is actually to go and meet with the head of the family, to go meet with the husband, or sometimes, just to see what's going on. You need anything, because if the husband's in the masjid, who's cooking and who's like taking care of him? Or the other way around, right? If a woman's in the masjid, a husband is going to what? What is he going to do? He's going to go and check on her, see how she's doing. So, bringing food and having that communication. So, Wallahu alam, it would seem that that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that. So accepting visitors is completely fine, unless all you're doing is accepting visitors during the itikaf. And for the parents, itikaf needs to be, so if your parents say, hey, listen, no, we want you home, you actually have to break your itikaf. That's it. Any questions on itikaf? Yes. Alaikum salam.
But I might have missed the question. If I know somebody who's in Indiana where he actually had work,
yeah.
So I missed that line, and would come right back after work. Is that?
So the question, we defining itikaf, what did we say itikaf was? It was the time that you stay in the masjid. If I'm not in the masjid, it's not itikaf. Right? The only time that the continuity, when would the continuity be allowed, or when would it continue? Like, when would it be okay? Right, like if it's something that's quick, like if I'm going out to use the bathroom and then coming back to the masjid, did I break the continuity of my itikaf? No, right? If I went to go out to get food and then I came back, all of those would be okay, because they're small, right? There's very small amounts of time. Or the Prophet ﷺ escorting his wife home and then heading back to the masjid. All of those are completely reasonable. But now if I'm going for like 8 hours, I'm breaking. It doesn't mean that I can't renew my intention and have itikaf for the time, get the reward for itikaf for the time that I'm there. Because we said that in the madhāhib that has the most lenience on this, how long does itikaf have to be?
1 hour.
It could be a moment, right? It could just be a moment. Like, it could just be like, bam, sat down 5 minutes, read like a page of the Quran, and like itikaf done. Obviously, the longer the itikaf, inshallah, the more reward that's associated. Tafadhal.
You mentioned work night being like a special kind of need.
Mm-hmm.
So would that kind of tie to what she's saying, or?
So remember we said that the Shafi'is, they said that if it's a small amount of work, right? So there's a tolerance, but the thing is, like, you know, you're going for a full work day. Like the top that I think that's outside of that tolerance level. And for the Ḥanbalis, they're even worse. They said what? They said no work at all, right? As soon as you start working, you have broken your i'tikaf. Tafadhal ya akhi.
So just to clarify, so someone, let's say someone's at home and they're working and they come to the masjid at Maghrib time.
Yeah.
And they stay until Fajr.
Yep.
So for the time being where they weren't at the masjid, that wouldn't be counted as
I'tikaf. No.
But then when you go to the masjid and you have the intention that I'm going to stay here until Fajr.
Yeah.
And then that time period counts.
That would count. Yeah, that would be considered i'tikaf. And the thing is, the reason there's so much elasticity in the issue is because there's nothing like the Prophet ﷺ didn't dictate, like, okay, this is, you know, i'tikaf is this is the minimum amount or this is the maximum amount. It's a very open-ended type of worship. And we had talked about open-ended worship. What are some other types of open-ended worship that we have? Dua. It's very open-ended, right? Is there a minimum dua? No, right? There's no minimum, there's no maximum. Is there a prescription on how it should be done? No, right? Are there impermissible types of dua? Yes, there are. Just like there are impermissible types of i'tikaf, right? What is a good example of an impermissible type of i'tikaf? If I make i'tikaf in my house, would that be counted as i'tikaf? No. Or like we said, you know, I'm working in the masjid, right?
So what if you have a big house and you just keep part of the house to be a masjid?
Yeah.
And so that is why, because you don't have access to the masjid, that's why you can go in.
So so the thing is, utilizing that time, you know, I think it's important for us to understand applying certain terms because of limitations. It doesn't mean that we won't be rewarded for that time, right? But will it be the reward of i'tikaf? No. Why? Because we said that it has to be a masjid. Unless you are a woman who is Hanafi. That's the only exception. That's the only exception. We said they can make it. I get you. They can make it where? They can make it at home in their designated prayer space. Can you make qiyas? Men and women? Like the Sharia applies to men just like it applies to women. Therefore, I can. So, and also I can take 7 days off a month.
No, you raised over a comment, and can you just back up for me when you said, did you say something about if a person's working in the mosque?
Yeah.
Did you mention that?
Yeah, because so here, it depends on the type of work. Like, for example, as an imam, what do I need to do?
Finish work.
Okay, but what is my work is to lead the prayers and to give talks, and like, am I doing anything that would break the i'tikaf?
No, really.
Not really. What's the difference between me and the other people though?
But you get paid for
I'm getting paid. That's the difference. That is a difference, right? That I am getting paid. Will that affect the i'tikaf?
Yeah, because you work.
Because technically I'm working, right?
You could take days off or vacation and then come back to the masjid.
But I will still come to Sheikh, please.
I mean, no, so the thing is, you would still be working, but what's the difference? You wouldn't be getting paid. That's actually a really good question. I have no idea.
So if you're being paid, then you can't do that.
Well, I don't know. But I mean, I think it's a valid question. The only thing I can say is if you have active intention during that time. So the thing is, what does paid staff have access to in the masjid that a normal congregant wouldn't have access to? Right? They might have access to certain bathrooms. They have access to the kitchen. They have access to office space. So what happens with those people when they're tempted with those spaces? Right. They not just lose their focus. What tends to happen? They'll go into those spaces. Why? Right, because the privilege is definitely part of it. Right, the privilege is definitely part of it. The other thing is, like, just sometimes being around the congregants all day because it's work, what happens?
You get tired.
Right, you get tired. It becomes a bit overwhelming, and you feel like you need a break. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So my question, in my case, I would open my office door for congregants to come in, and I would put coffee on, tea, they would come, like if there's no space.
Sure.
And they would eat in there, so it's not, am I working?
But you're not in the musalla anymore.
Isn't that part of?
No, it's not part of the masjid. It can be an extension for congregational prayer, but it is not the prayer space.
So even if we're just eating and reading Quran.
No. So if you did that in the musalla, sure. Because what is the condition for the i'tikaf? It has to be where? It has to be in the masjid. So
It is in the masjid, technically.
no, it's not designated prayer space. Yeah, and what are some of the differences on how we deal with the masjid and how we don't? We deal with the separate space. Like for example, if a woman is on her cycle, she'll be more comfortable coming in here, but would she go there? Why? It's the same building. Because it's a musalla, it's a prayer space, right? And we have to understand, like a religious designated prayer space, we deal with it differently than we do extended spaces. But if someone prays in here, would we consider that okay? As part of the congregation? Because congregational extended spaces are okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. They can go far back as you want, and you'll still be considered part of the Jama'ah. You'll still be considered part of the congregation. But would I be considered to be in the masjid? Like for example, if we blocked off which direction? If we blocked off Route 7.
You don't get.
No, let's say that we blocked off Route 7, and because there's just too many people, so we blocked off Route 7, and the rows extended onto Route 7. Would they be considered part of the congregation?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Would they be in the masjid?
No.
No. So it's the same thing with the office spaces.
So, just because my office is there, I have one more question on this.
Yeah.
In the past, when, like during Eid or
Mhm.
something like that, I've had people ask me to open the space because they ran out of space
For
praying.
that's okay, because what are we talking about? We're talking about extension. There's a difference between being part of the congregation or being in the prayer space. Let me give you a clear example. The bathrooms. Are those prayer spaces?
No.
But they're part of the same building. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Okay. So just because something's in the same building or the same structure, it doesn't actually mean that it is the prayer space. Even this space here, right? This is, right? The courtyard is kind of iffy. Why? Right? Because it's a convertible space, right? It's a convertible space. It's not, right? Fluid. It's like it's a fluid space that it can identify as whatever it wants. Versus the space in the back. It's a dedicated prayer space. It will not be used for anything else, except maybe the kids playing football every once in a while. But other than that, it is a pretty much a dedicated prayer space, meaning that once we roll up the carpets here, again, and I don't mean to keep using the example, but if a woman was on her cycle, how uncomfortable would she be if the carpets were rolled up here to come in? She'd be fine. Like she wouldn't see it to be issue. But would she be as comfortable going in the back? No, she wouldn't. Yeah, and forget the khilaf, because there is. Can a woman on her cycle, enter a prayer space or not? That's a completely different issue. But I'm just talking about our own understanding. We all have a dealing with the masjid. We all have a dealing with sacred spaces, very different than we do outside of those spaces. Right, and this is just how we designate them, which is why it's important, when it comes to actually building structure and building masajid, that we have that understanding when we build it. So even if I asked you guys, what is more important, the prayer space or the community space? The prayer. I would say the community space. I would agree with you. Why?
Because it's used more.
Not just used more.
It can be converted.
It can be, right. You can always extend the space, right? You can always extend the space. What the problem is, once I designate a prayer space, what happens? I limit the use, right? I limit the use significantly. But if I just leave something general community space, what happens? it can become multi-purpose, and I can use it for multiple reasons. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't accommodate. Obviously, we should have a prayer space. But when we have, if I have a plan, if I have a floor plan, I should do the best as possible to minimize the amount of designated prayer space versus the amount of usable space. The next section is Kitab al-Hajj and Umrah. What time is it then? That's now? 7:36. Okay. Oh, we still got 20 minutes until so. Kitab al-Hajj wa Umrah. What are the conditions? These are all of the conditions for Hajj, right? That has to be Muslim, he has to be free, sane, adult, once, and ability. And ability I put an asterisk next to because there are different layers to what ability means and how that applies. Obviously, the person needs to be Muslim, right? This one is clear. He has to be free versus a slave. Like, why is it a condition that he be free? Like, you don't have the same condition for prayer, correct? Why for Hajj?
Because the slave is in the master's control.
Right. Okay. So the slave is owned. Like the slave is like property. But what else? What is the other thing? Because a slave exempted from fasting or praying?
But the slave can own property.
Right. That's the problem. Right. So when we talk about ownership, this is the real issue. Ownership in the sense that what does Hajj require? That fasting and praying don't require. It requires money.
But even if
ability, we had talked about that ability is something that's really important. And what does ability mean? So when we think of ability, what are some things that come to mind?
Financial.
Right, financial, physical ability, and what else?
Safety.
Right, safety, right, like logistic ability. Like if I'm healthy and I have the money, but the trip is super unsafe, am I exempted from going? Right, and that's something that we'll talk about. So financially, there are two things, right? It's for the trip and for overall stability. For the trip, there are two elements that the madhab mentions. One of those is that for sustenance, right, that I can actually feed myself, and to pay for the trip itself. So these are usually the two parts. And they say if you have these two, then that's the first part. The second part is that my family actually have enough money. Like I have to be debt free, and my family needs to have enough money until my return. Right. So these are what the madhab talks about. And the reason they don't mention physical ability is because there are certain exceptions and there are alternatives that are available, which is why financial ability is the one that is focused on. And even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, فَتَزَوَّدُوا فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ الزَّادِ التَّقْوَى. That prepare for the trip, right? You have to prepare. This is what zad is. Zad is to have that preparation. And the preparation is this sustenance. So how do we gauge it? How do I determine how much I need?
How much money you need to get there, how much you need,
Yes.
and how much money you like need for extra stuff.
Yes.
estimated for maybe you went.
Right. Exactly. So you basically what you do, you're looking at those who are in a similar position. Now it's a little bit easier because we have what? All right, we got packages and we have an idea of what we can afford, what we can't afford, what is difficult. And what is the difference? Everybody who always asks me like which package I should choose, like when I go for Hajj, what do you think my answer is? All right, not just whatever you can afford, because everybody can afford the $5,000 one. I don't even think it's 5 anymore, right? It's like six or seven now. Yeah. So, I say choose the most comfortable. I always say that. I say, listen, take the highest one you can afford. It's not which one you can afford, right? Because you can afford the cheapest one, but take the highest one you can afford. Why is that?
The reward is still there.
The reward is still there, and it's like unnecessary hardship, right? It's really unnecessary hardship. You're putting yourself in, and like the quality of the tents, the quality of the food, the transportation, all of those things will make a difference. Hajj is already difficult. Like, just like you're talking about, like sometimes 1.5+ million people. and everybody's trying to go to the same place at the same time. It's not, yeah, just think about that. You have 1.5 million people trying to go from the same places at the same time. It can be, I won't say it is chaotic, but it can be very chaotic.
Why don't you say it is?
No, because it's surprising on how chaotic it can be, but it's not.
I think 1% of his credit card under I won't start running on the capital. Yeah, everyone is like financial.
I'll make it easy for him. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had a friend who received a gift from Saudi Arabia,
Sure.
and she took it and went to Hajj, and she said at one point she just left the tent because she didn't feel she was at Hajj.
Yeah.
It was so air conditioned, there was so much.
Yeah. So like this program, I don't know if they still have it. It's called like Duyuf al-Malik or something like that. It's basically guests of the king. And what happens is that new Muslims, they apply for this program and the king actually hosts them. So what, like the quality of the Hajj, so what's interesting? I mean, they might be new Muslims or I don't know what their criteria. I always thought the criteria was new Muslims. And other ones that I won't mention. So what happened is that I actually know somebody who went on this and he was saying the same thing. He was like, man, he's like, Hajj is amazing. Like, you know, he's like, you get like lobster tail and like, you know, he's like, Hajj is the greatest thing ever. Blah, blah. And then he made Hajj with me. And let's just say that I don't have top tier Hajj package. There's a lot of walking. There's a lot of crowd, and you know, and it was like he went from like hero Hajj to like hobo Hajj, you know. Yeah, it was still H, alhamdulillah. So the thing is, it was a big shift for him. It was a big shift for him, like going from a certain type of tent to like having to sit outside, having to be outside. It was really challenging, right? It was really difficult. But I do know what you're talking about. But saying that, I understand that sometimes the extravagance can be overwhelming for the people who are on like those really high tier, high level packages. But what should I do at that point as an individual? I should thank Allah. Like really, I am part of I have received a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasn't given everyone. So if I'm in a state, if I feel like there's a lot of extravagance around me, what can I do that maybe someone who isn't dealing or doesn't have that same extravagance do?
Share it.
All right, I can share it for sure. That's one positive. Spend time on the gram, right? Right. I can remove myself, right? So and I'll just give you some ideas because the thing is like I've been able to make Hajj with like these executive packages before, and they are very extravagant. Saying that, it gives you a lot more time to do individual dua. It gives you a lot more time to do individual prayers. You do it more comfortably because you have air conditioning, right? You know, all of these facilities are there. Like, you know, if there's a lot of food, I still have a choice on how much I can eat, right? So what should I do? Right? Just eat enough to sustain myself. And maybe this is how I'm being thankful, right? If I see everybody walking around with like this much food on their plate, and these are 24-hour open buffets, by the way. Like, yeah, and like, you know, and then they have a cook who will cook to order also. But I'm saying, huh? Yeah. I mean, the thing is, money isn't everything, right? You know, money isn't everything, meaning that like in the quality of our clothes, like we all come to the same masjid, but you can even tell just looking at the person's prayer mat, right? You know, these things, it'll show up. Right? It doesn't matter what you do. And even everybody's like, oh, you know, everybody is wearing ihram. You can see the quality ones and the low quality ones. You can tell the difference. And how do you know, like the material, how the length, like, so what happens is like the cheaper ihrams are actually shorter. Like it'll be like a shorter towel. And the more valuable ones will be longer. Right? It costs more money. Like it's more material, it's more cloth. So these things, unfortunately, like that's reality. You know, you have money will enter and it'll change the dynamic of everything and anything. But it's my obligation to take advantage of whatever blessings Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me and blessed me with. And I can actually maximize that. Now I don't have to walk 45 minutes to the jamarat or an hour. I'm literally walking outside of my tent, 10 minutes, I'm done and I'm back in my tent. Just doing Rami and just coming back. Utilize that time, be thankful, utilize my money. There are brothers who I know what they would do is they would do the Rami. And if they had time during the day, they would give like 100 riyal, which is like equivalent to like $30, $40, get a ride to the haram, go make tawaf and then come back to their tent. Again, utilize whatever means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me. I have to maximize those means. If I have a 45-minute walk, what can I do? I can make adhkar on the way. You know what I mean? This is what Allah has given me, so I have to make the best of it. But it's very important for us to be thankful and make the best of any situation and every situation that we're given. But anybody here not made Hajj yet? Oh man, this is beautiful.
Are you gonna take that?
And why not? Inshallah. Well, we'll definitely plan for it, bi'idhnillah. And we'll try to get a good package.
You didn't talk about single mothers going. You talked about-
We will. We're going to get to women because that's something that's important in the madhāhib. So we said physical ability and safety. Some scholars, they add these two conditions, but again, because there are exceptions to these, safety is something they all agree on. Safety is something they all agree on. Physical ability is something that's worthy of discussion because there are individuals who are sick. There are individuals who have physical inability. Some people, logistic problems, right? Their country just won't let them make Hajj. Do those people have a way out? Yeah, it's something called badal. It's where somebody does it in your place. And inshallah, that's something that we'll talk to and we'll get to. There's about 5 minutes left. So what I'll do is I'll stop here. I think it's a good place to stop, inshallah, and take a couple questions and then we'll go for salah. You have any questions? No? Khalas. I'll see you guys after salah. We'll have the tazkiyah class, inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Thank you.